Hi, I'm Rick Rheins, the senior rabbi at Temple Sinai in Denver, Colorado. And this week's Torah portion is Beshalach. It's the Shabbat called Shabbat Shirah, the Sabbath of song. Why? Because in the Torah portion, it's from the 13th end of the 13th chapter of the book of Exodus through the 16th and 17th chapter of Exodus. In this chapter 15 of this week's Torah portion, we have the Song of the Sea, and the children of Israel have just crossed the Sea of Reed, and they turn around and they see the miraculous redemption that they have experienced, and they sing Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nada ba'kodesh, and Moses and the children of Israel are singing. Miriam and all the daughters of Israel bring out their timbrels and they dance. And so in celebration, this Shabbat is called Shabbat Shirah, the Sabbath of song, a celebration of our redemption. So you'd think that the entire Torah portion is all about singing and celebration and positive. No, it's not. It's actually about a lot of kvetching and a lot of complaining, a lot of grumbling, and a lot of worrying for good reason. Why? Well, the children of Israel had just reached the Sea of Reeds. It's the very beginning of that redemptive story. That Leil Shimurim, which we had last week, that night of watching, has passed. Now the children of Israel have grabbed all they could. Now they're right at the border, at the shoreline of the Sea of Reeds, and they see that there's this water they have to cross. They see behind them, it's the cavalry of Pharaoh charging toward them, 600 chariots charging to do them in. And the children of Israel had their first major complaint to Moses. They have this wonderful, cynical question. They said, Moses, what? There weren't enough graves in Egypt that you had to schlep us all the way out here so that we can die and be buried easier? So Moses is worried, and he's crying out to God. And God says, Matitach alai. Why are you crying unto me? This is not the time for prayer, Moses. He says, you shall ready daber el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, v'yis'a'u, and march them forward. It's a time for action. So the children of Israel, after the complaints, after the worry, after the cynicism, they cross the Sea of Reeds and they get to the other side. Ollie, ollie, income free, right? We're all home free. It's all over. It's all good. No, you know it's not. We've read the story before. It's 40 years in the wilderness. How did we get that? So right after crossing the Sea of Reeds, the children had celebrated. They sang their song. They get thirsty. You want some water. So they go and they try to get some of this water that they found, and it's bitter. And these bitter waters they can't drink. So, of course, they're complaining again to Moses. Moses, what are we supposed to do in the middle of the wilderness? We don't have water to drink. So Moses cries out to God, and God said, okay, Moses, look, you can take some of this wood, you put it in the water, you can turn the bitter waters into sweet. And they did, and they drank. And then that's all happily ever after, right? Come on. They go a little bit further and they realize we're hungry. You got 600,000 men of fighting age, plus all the other people. So even if you say, okay, there weren't actually 3 or 4 or 5 million people who are coming out of Egypt, there were still a lot of people, and you got to feed them. What are they going to eat? They don't have a little bit of bread, a little bit of matzah. That's going to be enough. It's not enough. And so Moses cries out to God, and God says, you know what? Look up and look around. There's going to be manna from heaven. And the children of Israel were able to gather that manna and satisfy their hunger. And you'd think, okay, so they had bitter waters made sweet. They were able to survive Pharaoh's onslaught. They had bread now from heaven. That's enough. Well, the bitter waters were only at that well over there. Now that they've slept a little bit further into the wilderness, they need to have some more water. Where are they going to find the water? So the people are complaining. They said, Moses, we told you it'd been easier for us just to go back into Egypt. At least we had ready food, ready water. And yes, okay, the harsh labors and the slavery and the oppression, they forgot about that. But they were complaining to Moses, because that's what people do when they're worried. They complain. So this time, Moses cried out to God, and God said, take your staff and strike the rock, and it'll bring forth water. And it did. Now that is in contradiction, I suppose, to what is happening later on in the Torah, when Moses was told to speak to the rock and not to strike the rock. But in this case, this first instance, Moses was actually told to strike the rock, maybe a little digging of the well, and it brought forth water. And you think, okay, water's been taken care of, food's been taken care of. We survived Pharaoh. But there was a fifth challenge in this week's Torah portion alone, a fifth challenge at the conclusion of the parasha in chapter 17. We find Amalek, this terrorist tribe that plagued Israel and has plagued Israel throughout our history. But this first encounter, Amalek attacked the rear of the caravan, where the sick, the women, the children, the infirm, the elderly, the stragglers in the caravan, that's where they were. That's where Amalek attacked. And they were a fearsome terrorist tribe in the wilderness. And Moses told Joshua, get the troops together. We have to fight against Amalek. And they fought all day long. And Moses said, I'm going to stand on this hill. I'm going to raise up my arms. And when you see these arms have your faith strengthened, find inspiration from that. Look not at my arms, look at the heavens, and realize what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the future of our people. We're fighting for the covenant of our people and our faith. And Moses held up his hands, but the hands grew heavy. Moses was already not such a young person. And so they put rocks under so he could sit down, and they raised his hands up, Aaron on one side, Hur on the other, raised Moses' hands, and they were able to prevail against Amalek that day. But it bracketed the attack that we had at the beginning of the parasha from Pharaoh, which we survived. The final attack by Amalek, we survived, but it wasn't easy. It took Hur and Aaron and Joshua all helping Moses, all helping the children of Israel to prevail. And the concluding line said that, you know what? I'll be with you, God said. I will be with you to help you against Amalek in every generation. The message I wanted to convey about this week's Torah portion, yes, the Shabbat Shira, yes, the Sabbath of song, yes, it's the Shirat HaYam, the song at the sea of celebration. But it's also a realization that even in the best of times, we're going to have setbacks. We're going to have the challenges. And it may be something like water. It may be something like food. It certainly is about our security. And it certainly is about the overwhelming sense that we are under attack. But as Moses was told, Al titzach alai, don't just cry, just don't pray, act. It's a time to speak to the children of Israel, to speak to each other and say, we can go forward. And that's what we need to do continually, that we will have our complaints. Complaints are a part of what we do, right? Okay. But we also have to act on them and not just allow those words to rob us of our faith, to rob us of our hope. It's time to act, to continue to wear a mask, to keep some of the distance. And when you can, get the vaccine, and to hold on with faith, to hold your hands up to others who are starting to see their spirits decline. You raise them up and say, don't give up. We're going to get through this. Now it's easier said than done, which is why God said, Al titach, don't cry, don't just talk about it. It's time to move forward, to do the right thing. I pray on this Shabbat Shira, the Sabbath of song, the Sabbath of celebration, we'll remember that even in the best of times, there are challenges. And together we can lift each other up. We can get through singing the song of hope for today, and certainly reminding ourselves that that hope will grow stronger tomorrow. Shabbat Shalom.